Awesome, Kelly. Thanks so much. That's right. Right now, we're going to welcome on Joanna Marsh. And Joanna, we're talking about train lengths and this situation growing, and now an emergency act has been put in place to potentially sign. Can you tell us a little bit more about the situation?
Sure. So I'm sorry, it was about train lengths, and what was the second part of
Oh,
what you
sorry.
mentioned?
Yeah, that there was a motion to have an emergency act of some sort put into place until there's some kind of...
Oh, yes. Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Yeah, hi, hello. So train lengths. Yeah, so the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen sent a letter to Federal Railroad Administrator Amit Bose asking FRA to implement an emergency order, which would limit the length of freight trains to 7,500 feet or 7,500 feet. And with the argument that longer trains have different physics than shorter trains, especially like when you're going, uphill, or if the uphill. I can't think of the word, but if it's gradual or steep, there's just it feels different driving a longer train than a shorter one under 7,500 feet, and so they would like to have FRA implement that emergency order. The Association of American Railroads and some others are saying that there are some trains that run longer than 7,500 feet. Well, essentially that there haven't been the issues the issues don't warrant an emergency order, so that's kind of what's going on with that. Was it something else I wanted to mention about the train length? But I'm sure it'll come to me as we're talking.
So, Joanna, one of the interesting things about the notice by the BLET union is the fact that they talk about how infrastructure and the way that kind of normal like city roads and city building planning was set up weren't meant to accommodate these train lengths. And we see it right here in Chattanooga. There's one train crossing that exists right next to a school and right next to a hospital, where when your trains are a certain length and they get stopped at a certain place on the railroad, they block the crossing oftentimes for 45 minutes to upwards of 2 hours, limiting traffic directly to a hospital there. That's an issue that the BLET union points out, is that these train lengths aren't built to be, or they become too long for these crossings in the way that roads are laid out to actually accommodate. Is that something that is a legitimate concern, and we see it in more places than just the anecdotal evidence right here in Chattanooga, but is that something that is a legitimate concern, is the fact that these train lengths, if they are so long, run the risk of being a hindrance to traffic and sometimes dangerous?
Yeah, so that is an argument for sure that there are parts of the network that don't have the capacity to handle those longer trains, such as sidings, and that's an argument that Amtrak also has, because Amtrak shares it's the tracks with the freight railroads, and so sometimes even though passenger trains like Amtrak have priority per federal law they have priority of the tracks because of the longer trains, and because there's not a place for the longer trains to wait. So it gets kind of hairy and complicated in terms of like trying to organize who goes when and for how long, especially if it's a long train. Although it's interesting that it's kind of the situation that you describe in Chattanooga sounds kind of like a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, because on one hand you do have that question of longer trains taking more time to go through rail crossings. The flip side of that argument is that if you have shorter trains, that means you could potentially increase the frequency of trains running through, which means you might not have to wait as long, but there might be more periods where you do have to wait. So it's it's kind of one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't situations for now. But it doesn't seem like it's an issue that's going to be resolved immediately soon anyway, just because, the FRA has a proposed rulemaking on it, or just, is looking at the issue. And there still hasn't really been any, even though that rulemaking is out, there hasn't really been any movement one way or the other.
And Joanna, one of the things you outline here is that there has to also be the training of those engineers to handle the trains of these lengths. When we're looking at this issue here, is it something that has been an issue for some time, or has it been something that's been increasing over the last few years?
Yeah, that was actually the thing that I wanted to say, and I couldn't remember what it was. So thank you for saying that. Yes, the training issue, especially as after the COVID-19 pandemic, even the staffing levels had been reduced at the Class 1 railroads, and actually they've been steadily reducing over the last several years. Some say because of precision scheduled railroading, but even though those levels have come back up a little bit, they're still kind of actually around like COVID level, April of 2020 levels. But the issue of train length, I think so. The issue of train length kind of became more of an issue as the Class 1 railroads adopted precision scheduled railroading, PSR, which is sort of an operational method looking at how can you streamline operations. Some say cut costs essentially, and so one of them is like, well, what if you run longer trains? And so I think that even though there have been some trains that have run longer than 7,500 feet, I think a lot of the attention gets drawn to like the really long ones, like the 3-mile ones, and I think the encouragement to deploy longer trains within the industry, has been. People would say, has been kind of the result of PSR. Although the railroads will also say that the longer trains, if you run fewer trains, that also reduces the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that the industry, outputs. So, but either way, it's still going to be around for a while, the issue.
It's going to be an interesting case to see how this eventually gets resolved and if the FRA decides to respond back to this union letter. Joanna, thank you for joining us this morning.
All right, thank you for having me.